Captain Jake Lawson, a young human explorer, stood before the towering palace of the Andromeda Empire. The ancient stone walls were covered with strange symbols, and the air was thick with the scent of alien flowers. He had heard stories about the Andromedan species, an ancient and powerful race, but seeing their home in person was something entirely different. The entire palace seemed to hum with the weight of centuries of history. Jake was not alone. He was part of Earth's first diplomatic mission to the Andromeda Empire, a momentous occasion. The goal was simple: establish a peaceful relationship between Earth and the Andromedans. If successful, humanity would join a galactic community of powerful civilizations. But for Jake, it wasn't just about politics, it was about representing Earth, his home. The palace was massive, with long corridors that stretched far beyond the horizon. Jake followed his Andromedan guide, a tall, lithe figure who walked with an air of grace and confidence. She spoke little, but her presence was enough to remind Jake of the deep power of the empire he was now a part of. They stopped in front of a grand hall, its doors wide open. Inside, the space was filled with alien dignitaries, each species as different from one another as could be imagined. The walls were adorned with sparkling gems, and large windows let in beams of soft golden light. The air inside felt charged, as if the room itself were alive. At the far end of the hall, sitting on a throne made of silver and crystal, was Queen Varela. Jake had heard much about the Queen. She was known as a wise and fair ruler, loved by her people and respected by her enemies. But it wasn't her reputation that took Jake by surprise. It was her presence. She exuded a calm strength, her dark purple skin glowing softly under the light. Her eyes, a deep shade of violet, locked onto Jake the moment he stepped into the room. For a brief second, the world around him seemed to disappear. The Queen's voice broke the silence. "Welcome, Captain Lawson. I am honored to have you here." Jake bowed slightly, trying to maintain his composure. "It is an honor to be here, Your Majesty." There was a slight smile on her face, though her gaze remained intense. "Please join me. I have much to discuss with you." As Jake made his way to the throne, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of awe. This was not just any ruler. This was someone who had seen centuries of history unfold, someone whose decisions could change the fate of entire civilizations. The Queen spoke of the Andromedan Empire's history, their rise to power, and their hopes for the future. She spoke with a quiet wisdom, and Jake listened intently. He understood the importance of the mission at hand, but as the conversation continued, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Suddenly, the room seemed to shift. There was a strange noise, a crackling sound like a surge of electricity. The air grew thick, and Jake's instincts told him that danger was near. Without warning, two figures burst into the room. They were armed, their faces masked, and their movements quick. A blaster shot rang out, narrowly missing the Queen. Jake instinctively moved toward her, pushing her out of the way as the attackers fired again. The other dignitaries scattered, chaos erupting in the once peaceful hall. The Queen, unshaken, stood up, her hand glowing with a strange energy. She raised it, and the attackers were thrown back, slamming into the wall with incredible force. The room fell silent. Jake helped the Queen to her feet, his heart pounding in his chest. "Are you all right?" The Queen nodded, her expression serious. "I am unharmed, but the situation is worse than I imagined." Jake looked at the fallen attackers, then back at the Queen. "Who were they?" The Queen's eyes darkened. "Rebels. There are those who do not wish for peace between our people and the humans. They believe that the Andromedan Empire should remain isolated, that we should not share power with others." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "So they came to kill you?" "Yes," she replied softly. "And they would have, had you not intervened." Jake was confused. He had never been trained to deal with intergalactic politics or assassination attempts. His training had been about exploring new worlds, not fighting rebels. But something about the Queen's calm demeanor made him feel as if he had just stumbled into something much larger than himself. The Queen looked at Jake, her expression softening for a moment. "You saved my life, Captain Lawson. For that, I owe you a debt." Jake shook his head. "I didn't do it for a reward. It was just instinct." The Queen's gaze lingered on him. Instinct. A rare trait in these times. Before Jake could respond, the Queen's guards entered the room, quickly securing the area. But Jake's mind was still racing. He had just been thrust into a situation far beyond anything he had ever imagined. The Queen's life had been saved by a human, and now the Andromedan Empire would be watching him closely. But then the Queen did something that surprised Jake even more. She took a step closer to him, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Captain Lawson," she said, "there is something you need to know. The child I carry, it is yours." Jake blinked, confused. "What? How could that be?" The Queen took a deep breath, her gaze never leaving his. "I do not know how it happened, but I am pregnant with your child. It is a child that, according to Andromedan prophecy, could change the course of the galaxy." Jake stood frozen, his mind struggling to comprehend what she had just said. Pregnant? With his child? How was that possible? He had never been close to the Queen in that way, let alone this. Before he could form any more questions, the room fell silent again. The reality of the situation hit Jake like a ton of bricks. He had no idea how this had happened, but one thing was certain: his life was about to change forever. Jake Lawson stood in shock, staring at Queen Varela. The words she had just spoken echoed in his mind, but they didn't make sense. Pregnant with my child? He had barely exchanged more than a few words with her, let alone. No. It couldn't be true. Yet the seriousness in her eyes told him that she wasn't joking. This was no game. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His mind raced, and confusion turned into disbelief. How could this happen? He had been on this planet only a few days, and had spent most of that time in meetings and formal events. Never once had he thought his mission would lead to something like this. Queen Varela, sensing his confusion, took a deep breath and spoke again, her voice steady but heavy with the weight of what she had just revealed. "I know this is difficult to understand, Captain. I, too, was caught off guard when I found out." Jake tried to focus, shaking his head slightly to clear the fog. "But how? I don't remember anything like that. We've barely interacted." The Queen nodded solemnly, her face revealing the same mix of confusion and concern that Jake felt. "I don't know. It's as if fate itself decided to intervene. Some unknown force brought us together, and now I carry your child." Jake was silent for a long moment. He wanted to ask more questions, to demand answers. But there was something about the way the Queen spoke, the sincerity in her tone, that made him hold back. She didn't seem to be lying, and she certainly didn't seem like someone who would make up a story like this. "Why are you telling me this?" Jake asked, his voice low, his mind still spinning. "I am telling you this because I need your help," the Queen replied. Her eyes met his with a quiet intensity. "Our people believe that the child I carry is the key to saving our empire. There is an ancient prophecy, one that foretells a union between a human and an Andromedan. A child born of this union will unite our people and bring about a new era of peace and prosperity." Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. He had heard stories of prophecies before, prophecies that had led to wars, broken alliances, and shattered hopes. But this was different. This was real. and it had just been thrust upon him. He had never signed up for any of this. He had come here to represent Earth, not to become part of some grand cosmic plan. But what does this have to do with me? Jake asked, still struggling to understand. I'm just a soldier, a human. I've never been part of any prophecy. You are more than just a soldier, the Queen said, her voice soft but firm. You are the one who has the power to change the future of both our species. The prophecy doesn't just talk about a human. It speaks of a specific human, one who will help me lead and protect the child we are about to bring into the world. Jake felt a weight settle on his shoulders. He had always been trained to act in the heat of battle, to follow orders, and to serve his people. But this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. The idea of being a father, of being a part of something as monumental as this prophecy, felt like a burden he wasn't sure he could carry. You're asking me to marry you, Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper, though the words hung heavily in the air. You're asking me to be with you, to raise this child, to play a part in fulfilling this prophecy. The Queen didn't answer immediately. She looked down, her eyes thoughtful. I am asking you to help me, yes, but I am not asking for marriage. In the way you might think. This child is not just a symbol of our union. It is the hope of an entire civilization. Without your help, I fear for the future of both our peoples. Jake took a step back, his mind racing. He had always known that diplomacy was a delicate matter, but he had never imagined it could lead to something like this. He was being asked to join with an alien queen, to bear witness to a prophecy that could change the fate of the galaxy. How could he say yes to that? How could he just agree to something so monumental? I don't know if I can do this, Jake admitted, his voice filled with uncertainty. This isn't something I ever thought I'd have to face. Queen Varella's gaze softened, and for a moment, she seemed to understand the weight of what Jake was feeling. I know this is difficult, Captain, but sometimes destiny is not a path we choose. It is a path we must walk. Whether we are ready for it or not. Jake looked at her, the words hanging in the air. He had never been one to shy away from duty, but this was different. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about two species, two cultures, and an unborn child that might change everything. The silence between them grew heavy, and Jake couldn't help but wonder if there was more to this story than he realized. Was this really fate? Or had he been pulled into something far beyond his control? He didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear. His life, and the lives of countless others, were now tied to this strange and powerful queen and the child she carried. Just as Jake was about to speak again, a loud noise interrupted the tension. A blaster shot echoed through the halls, followed by the sounds of rushing footsteps. The queen's expression hardened, and she stood up quickly, her hand already glowing with energy. "Stay close," she commanded, her voice now sharp with authority. "We are not alone." Jake's instincts kicked in as he followed the queen, his hand going to the blaster at his side. Something was wrong. The attack had been too sudden, too coordinated. The queen had many enemies, and now it seemed they were all closing in on her. The two of them hurried down the hallway, the sound of pursuit growing louder with every step. Jake couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning. Whatever this prophecy was, it had already attracted dangerous attention, and he was about to become an even bigger part of it. The corridor was dimly lit, the sharp echo of footsteps reverberating off the cold stone walls. Queen Varela led the way, her movements precise and confident, despite the chaos unfolding around them. Jake followed closely behind, his mind still, reeling from the queen's revelation, "Pregnant with my child." He couldn't shake those words, couldn't get them out of his head. The sudden blaster fire had left them with no choice but to flee the grand hall, and as they rushed through the winding passageways of the palace, the air was thick with tension. Jake's grip tightened around the hilt of his blaster, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He had always known that the diplomatic mission to the Andromeda Empire would be dangerous, but he had never expected it to turn into a life-altering event. Like this. Queen Varela stopped abruptly, turning to face him. Her violet eyes searched his, as if weighing his thoughts. "Captain," she said, her voice calm despite the urgency of the situation, "I know this is a lot to take in, but you must understand, the child I carry is not just important to me. It is important to the future of our empire and to yours." Jake exhaled slowly, trying to steady his racing thoughts. "I don't even know how this happened. One minute I'm here on a peace mission, and the next, I'm being told that I'm the father of an alien queen's child." "I understand your confusion," the queen replied, "but you must trust me when I say that this child holds the key to a future neither of our people can afford to ignore." Jake shook his head. "I don't know how I can help with that. I'm just a soldier. I'm not a king, and I certainly don't know anything about prophecies or ancient rituals." "You are more than just a soldier," Varela said, her tone soft but firm. "The prophecy speaks of you, not just anyone. It is your presence, your strength, and your willingness to protect that will unite us. Without you, the future is uncertain." Jake felt the weight of her words pressing down on him. The queen was asking him for more than just his help. She was asking for his trust, his commitment. And yet, he didn't know if he was ready for such a responsibility. He was just a man who had been sent on a mission to represent Earth, not someone destined to change the course of two civilizations. "I'm not prepared for this," Jake said quietly, looking away. "I've never been prepared for anything like this." Queen Varela stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that took him by surprise. "I did not ask for this either, Captain, but now that we are here, we must face it together. We are stronger together than apart." Jake's heart raced as the Queen's words sank in. He had spent his life following orders, doing what he was told, but this was different. This was a choice he had to make. He could turn away, go back to Earth, and pretend that none of this had ever happened. But deep down, he knew he couldn't. There was something about this woman, something about the situation that tugged at him, pulling him into a destiny he hadn't asked for, but now felt bound to. "I don't know what to say," Jake admitted, his voice quiet. "I never thought I'd be asked to do something like this. To marry you, to be part of this prophecy. It feels impossible." The Queen nodded, her expression softening. "It may seem impossible now, but sometimes the most unlikely paths lead to the greatest futures. The universe has a way of guiding us, even when we are not looking." Jake's mind raced. He thought of Earth, of his home, his family, and the life he had left behind. He thought of the people he had sworn to protect, and how this situation could change everything for them. This child, the Queen's unborn child, could mean peace between their species, a peace that had been impossible for centuries. Could he really walk away from that? The Queen reached out, gently placing a hand on his arm. "I am not asking for a decision right away, but I need you to understand that your role in this is not just a matter of duty. It is a matter of fate. We are meant to work together to protect our people, to ensure that this child is born into a world that is ready for change." Jake stared at her hand on his arm, the weight of her words sinking in. There was something about the way she spoke, something that made him believe in the power of what they could do together. But could he really take on such a responsibility? Could he truly be the father of this child, a symbol of hope for two worlds? Just as he was about to speak, a loud explosion rocked the palace. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the walls around them cracked and groaned. The Queen's face hardened in an instant, her calm demeanor replaced by one of urgency. "They've found us," she said, her voice sharp. "We need to move now." Without another word, they both sprinted down the corridor, their footsteps quick and urgent. The sounds of battle were growing louder as they neared the palace's outer chambers. Jake's mind was still racing, but now there was no time for questions or doubts. The time for decisions was now. As they rounded a corner, they were met by a group of Andromedan soldiers, armed and ready for action. The queen immediately stepped forward, speaking to them in their native tongue. Her voice carried authority, and the soldiers moved aside, clearing the way for her and Jake. "We're almost there," the queen said, glancing back at Jake. "This way?" Jake's heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the point of no return. He had been thrust into this mission by fate, but now he had a choice. Would he walk away and let the queen face the consequences alone? Or would he stand by her side and take on the responsibility of a future he had never asked for? As they reached the palace's hidden escape route, Jake made his decision. "I'm in," he said, his voice firm. The queen looked at him, a small but genuine smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Then let us begin." Together, they moved forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever dangers awaited them. Jake no longer felt like a soldier simply following orders. He felt like a man on the verge of changing the course of history. The escape route was narrow, hidden deep within the palace. Jake barely had room to move, his shoulders brushing against the cold stone walls as he followed Queen Varela. Her pace was swift, purposeful, and despite the danger closing in on them, there was a calmness in her that Jake could not ignore. She was a queen, and this was not her first battle. He could see that now. She moved like someone who had faced countless challenges and had always come out on top. Jake's heart pounded. In his chest, not just from the physical exertion of running, but from the weight of the decision he had just made. "I'm in." The words echoed in his mind. There was no going back now. He was committed to this path, whatever it would bring. He had promised to stand by her side, and that meant facing whatever dangers awaited them. "Keep up, Captain," the queen called back to him, her voice steady and confident. "We are close to the surface, just a little farther." Jake nodded, though he was struggling to keep pace. The passage was winding, and every turn seemed to lead them deeper into the unknown. The sounds of battle had grown distant, but he knew it was only a matter of time before their enemies caught up with them. The rebellion against Queen Varela wasn't just a small faction. It was an organized, ruthless group, determined to see her removed from power. "How long until we reach the surface?" Jake asked, his voice strained. "We're almost there," the queen replied without looking back. "Just a few more minutes." Jake's mind was racing, trying to piece together everything that had happened since he first arrived on the Andromedan planet. He had come here as a diplomat to forge peace between Earth and the Andromedan Empire, never imagining that he would be pulled into a political war, let alone become part of a prophecy. Now, here he was, running for his life with an alien queen, who claimed he was the father of her child. A child who, according to her, was the key to the future of two worlds. His mind flashed back to their conversation earlier. "The prophecy speaks of you. You are the one who will unite us." The weight of those words was heavy, and the more he thought about it, the more uncertain he became. He wasn't a king. He wasn't even a ruler. He was just a soldier. But something inside him told him that he couldn't walk away from this, no matter how much he wanted to. As they reached a large chamber, the queen stopped and turned to face him. "This is where we part ways, Captain." Jake blinked, confused. "What do you mean? I thought we were heading to safety?" "We are," she said, her gaze firm. "But I must go on alone from here. There are things I must do to protect the child and our people. You cannot follow me any farther." Jake's stomach dropped. "What? You're sending me away?" "It is not a decision I make lightly," she replied. "But it is the only way. The rebellion must not know you are involved in this. They would use you to manipulate me, to use the child for their own gain. You are a target now, Captain Lawson. It is safer for you to leave, for both you and the child. Jake's mind raced, but he knew she was right. He had seen the cold, calculating way the rebels had attacked the palace. They would stop at nothing to achieve their goal. And if they discovered his connection to the Queen and the prophecy, they would use him against her. But what about you? Jake asked, his voice tight with concern. What will happen to you? The Queen's expression softened for a moment. I will be fine. I have my people, and I have my own ways of protecting myself and the child. But I need you to promise me something. What? Jake asked, his voice almost pleading. Promise me that you will stay safe. Promise me that you will not try to come after me. The danger is too great, and you have a role to play in the future of both our worlds. You must stay hidden, at least for now. Jake nodded slowly, though the weight of the promise felt heavy. I promise. But I won't just walk away. If you need me, I'll come back for you. Queen Varela gave him a small smile, one that didn't reach her eyes but was nonetheless genuine. I know you will. Before he could say anything else, the Queen turned and disappeared down a narrow corridor. Jake stood there, watching her go, unsure of what to do next. His mind screamed at him to follow, to not let her face whatever dangers awaited alone. But he had made a promise. And sometimes promises were more important than anything else. With a deep breath, Jake turned and made his way back the way they had come. The surface was still a long way off, but he had to find a way out, away from the palace and the growing conflict. He couldn't afford to be captured, not now when everything was on the line. As he exited the hidden chambers, the bright light of the surface greeted him. The night sky stretched out before him, vast and endless. The world seemed so peaceful, so untouched, yet he knew the calm would not last. The Andromedan Empire was on the brink of war, and his involvement was only just beginning. He had been part of a prophecy that said he and Queen Varela would unite their peoples, and now he had to figure out how to make that happen. The journey ahead was uncertain, and the road would be difficult. But Jake knew one thing for sure. He couldn't turn back now. The fate of two worlds rested on the shoulders of the unborn child, and he had promised to protect that future. As he walked away from the palace, the weight of the world on his shoulders, Jake couldn't help but wonder what the future held for him, for Queen Varela, and for the child they had created. The prophecy had set everything in motion, but the path ahead was still shrouded in darkness. The sun was setting over the horizon, casting long shadows across the rocky landscape. Jake Lawson stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes scanning the vast expanse before him. The journey from the palace had been long and tiring, and though he had managed to avoid capture, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. His thoughts were still heavy with the Queen's words. Promise me that you'll stay safe. The responsibility that weighed on him now was unlike anything he had ever felt. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was part of something far greater than himself, a force that could either unite two worlds or tear them apart. The rebellion was still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they had captured Queen Varela and destroyed the prophecy. Jake knew he had to find a way to stop them, to protect the unborn child, the symbol of hope for both Earth and the Andromedan Empire. But he had no idea where to start. He was just one man. How could he fight an entire rebellion on his own? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps broke through the stillness of the evening. Jake's hand instinctively went to his blaster, but he relaxed when he saw who it was. A tall, Andromedan soldier emerged from the shadows, his face stern but calm. Captain Lawson, the soldier said, bowing slightly. I was sent by the Queen to find you. Jake raised an eyebrow. The Queen? I thought she wanted me to stay away. She does, the soldier replied. But things have changed. The Queen has been captured. Jake's heart skipped a beat. What? How? Where is she? The soldier's expression darkened. The rebels have taken her. They attacked her convoy while she was traveling to a secret location. They knew she was vulnerable after leaving the palace. She is being held in a fortified facility in the northern mountains. Jake's mind raced. He had to act fast. The Queen was the key to everything, the prophecy, the peace between their worlds. Without her, the rebellion would have the upper hand, and the future of both species would be in jeopardy. "We need to move," Jake said, his voice determined. "I'm not going to let them win." The soldier nodded. "We've already started to gather a team. We'll need to move quickly before the rebels have a chance to relocate her." Jake didn't waste another moment. He quickly gathered his gear, preparing for the mission ahead. His heart was still heavy with uncertainty, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let Queen Varela down. Not after everything she had done for him, and not after the promise he had made. As they moved through the rugged terrain, the air grew colder. The mountains loomed ahead, their jagged peaks cutting into the sky like knives. The rebel stronghold was hidden deep within these mountains, a place where few dared to venture. Jake had to admit, even he was nervous. The rebels had always been a threat, but now they were more dangerous than ever. The team of soldiers was small but well-trained. They moved with the precision of experienced warriors, each of them focused on the mission. Jake could sense the tension in the air. The rebels were ruthless, and they had no intention of letting the Queen escape. As they neared the rebel base, Jake's mind began to race with plans. He needed to find a way to get inside the facility, rescue the Queen, and escape without getting caught. It seemed impossible, but he knew that he had to try. If he didn't, everything would be lost. The team approached the base under the cover of darkness, using the rocky terrain to shield their movements. They made it to the outer perimeter undetected, but Jake knew the real challenge was yet to come. The base was heavily guarded, and the rebels would not hesitate to kill anyone who attempted to free the Queen. "We'll split into 2 groups," Jake said, his voice low and urgent. "One group will create a distraction on the east side, while the other will infiltrate from the west. We'll meet at the central courtyard." The soldiers nodded in agreement, each one silently preparing for the danger ahead. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he took his position with the second group. The adrenaline was kicking in now, and there was no turning back. This was it, the moment that would determine the fate of the Queen, the child, and the future of both their worlds. The night air was still, the only sound the distant howling of the wind. Jake and his team crept through the shadows, moving swiftly and silently toward the central courtyard. The rebel base loomed ahead, a fortress of steel and stone. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their eyes scanning for any sign of intrusion. Jake's hand tightened around his blaster as they approached the outer walls. He signaled for the team to stop. They were close now, just a few more steps, and they would be inside. He waited for the signal from the first group. Moments later, a series of explosions rocked the east side of the base. The ground trembled beneath Jake's feet as the rebel guards scrambled to respond. This was their chance. "Move out!" Jake ordered. The team sprinted toward the walls, taking advantage of the confusion. They climbed over the high fences, their movements quick and efficient. Once inside, they spread out, moving toward the central courtyard where the Queen was being held. Jake's mind was focused solely on the mission. He had to find her. He couldn't afford to fail now. As they reached the courtyard, the sight that greeted them made Jake's blood run cold. Queen Varela was chained to a stone pillar, her head bowed, her body battered but still standing. Her eyes were closed, but when she heard their footsteps, she lifted her head. She was alive. But for how long? "Varela!" Jake shouted, rushing forward. The rebels guarding her turned, their weapons aimed at him, but they hesitated. It was a fatal mistake. Jake was faster. In a blur of motion, he fired, taking down the nearest guard. His team moved in, overwhelming the rebels with swift precision. The rest of the guards retreated, knowing they were outmatched. Jake rushed to the queen's side, his heart pounding in his chest. "Are you okay?" Queen Varela looked up at him, her expression tired but determined. "I knew you would come," she whispered. "You kept your promise." Jake quickly worked to free her from the chains, his hands shaking. "We need to get out of here. Now." Together they ran through the courtyard, the sound of reinforcements closing in behind them. The team fought to hold off the remaining rebels, but Jake knew time was running out. The base was about to be overrun and they needed to escape, fast, as they reached the exit. Jake turned to Queen Varela, his eyes meeting hers. This was only the beginning. The prophecy was far from over, and the battle for the future of both their worlds had only just begun. The cold wind of the mountain peaks bit at Jake's face as he and Queen Varela made their way through the dense forest. The rebels had been pushed back for now, but the battle was far from over. With every step, the weight of their mission grew heavier. The future of both Earth and the Andromedan Empire rested on their shoulders. Queen Varela was silent beside him, her body still weary from her captivity, but her resolve remained unbroken. Jake couldn't help but admire her strength. Despite everything that had happened, her capture, the threat to her life, and the uncertainty surrounding the prophecy, she had never wavered in her belief that they could make a difference. "I'm sorry it took so long to reach you," Jake said, breaking the silence. His voice was quiet but full of sincerity. "I promised I wouldn't leave you behind, but I wasn't sure how I could make it happen." Varela glanced at him, her violet eyes soft, but filled with a certain warmth. "You kept your word, Captain. That's more than I could have asked for." Jake paused for a moment, taking in her words. The path they were on was treacherous, but the uncertainty of the future was even more so. The child she carried, their child, was still the key to everything. But there were still so many unanswered questions. What would become of their people? Could they truly unite two such different civilizations? As they approached a clearing, Jake stopped. The place was quiet, with the sound of distant rushing water from a nearby stream filling the air. The sun had set, and the night sky stretched, out above them in a sea of stars. It was beautiful, and for a moment, Jake allowed himself to relax. "This is where we will make our stand," Varela said, her voice firm and determined. Jake turned to her, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "We can't run forever," she explained. "The rebellion will come for us again. They won't stop. And soon other factions, some on our side, some not, will make their moves. The future of the Andromedan Empire, the fate of our people, will all depend on what we do next." Jake nodded slowly, understanding her words. He had known, deep down, that this wasn't just about saving her. It was about saving an entire civilization. He had promised to protect her, and now he was realizing that his role in this wasn't just about being a protector. He was going to help shape the future of two worlds. "I've been thinking about what you said," Jake began, his voice steady. "About the prophecy. About being the father of the child you carry. I didn't ask for any of this. But I understand now that I'm part of something much bigger. I'm not just here to protect the child. I'm here to help build a future where we're not enemies, where humans and Andromedans can work together." Varela smiled at him, her expression softening. "That is exactly what the prophecy spoke of. Not just a human and an Andromedan coming together, but two civilizations learning to trust one another. Your role is more important than you realize, Jake." Jake exhaled, feeling the weight of her words settle into his chest. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew now that he couldn't turn back. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was the only road that mattered. Just as Jake was about to speak, the sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Several figures emerged from the shadows, and Jake's hand instinctively went to his blaster. But when he saw who it was, his tension eased. A group of Andromedan soldiers, led by the same soldier who had first found Jake, approached them. Their faces were grim, but there was a sense of purpose in their eyes. "We've secured the perimeter," the soldier said, bowing slightly to the queen. "The rebels have retreated for now, but we cannot rest for long. They will be back." Varela nodded. "We must prepare. The time has come to take the fight to them." Jake turned to the soldier. "What's our next move?" The soldier paused, clearly weighing the options. "We've gathered the remaining loyal forces. We have support from the outer systems. But we need to unite the factions within the Empire before we can move forward. There are still those who are unsure about the Queen's rule. Those who see her pregnancy as a threat. We need to gain their support before we can defeat the rebellion for good." Varela's gaze was steady. "Then we must do whatever it takes to unite our people. The child I carry will be the symbol of that unity, but it is up to us to make sure the future is secure." Jake nodded, his mind racing with thoughts of what needed to be done. He was just one man, but now he understood that his role in this fight was vital. He wasn't just fighting for the Queen, for the child, or for the Andromedan Empire. He was fighting for a future where peace was possible, where humans and Andromedans could work together. As they prepared to move out, Varela stopped and turned to Jake once more. "You've come far, Captain Lawson. I can't thank you enough for everything you've done." Jake smiled slightly, the weight of the moment not lost on him. "I'm just doing what's right. We all have a role to play in this." The group moved out, making their way toward the gathering of Andromedan forces. The tension in the air was palpable, but there was something else there too, a sense of determination. They had come this far, and they weren't going to stop now. As they reached the gathering point, Varela addressed the gathered soldiers, her voice strong and clear. "Tonight we begin the work of uniting our people. The rebellion may have taken much from us, but we will not let it tear us apart. We fight not just for our survival, but for a new future, one where humans and Andromedans can live together in peace." The soldiers stood at attention, their faces hard but hopeful. Jake stood beside the Queen, watching as the forces began to rally behind her. This was it, the beginning of a new era. The prophecy had spoken of unity, and now, with the Queen, the child, and the human who had become part of their future, it was finally within reach. As the night stretched on, Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over him. The road ahead would be long, and the challenges they faced would be immense. But for the first time since he had arrived on the Andromedan planet, Jake felt a sense of certainty. The future was theirs to shape. Together.